This is Putting Veterans First, a presentation of the National Veterans Rights Association. NVRA is an organization with one thing in mind, putting the rights and best interest of our veterans first and foremost. This program will provide guidance to the 60,000 homeless vets seeking help, to the millions denied benefits, to the families of more than 17,000 vets annually who commit suicide. Putting Veterans First is hosted by Stu Steinberg, a veteran who served in Vietnam as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist from 1968 to 1970 and a volunteer service officer for Vietnam Veterans of America since 1978. Now, here's Stu Steinberg.
This is Stu Steinberg, and we're going to talk about evidence, the most critical part of preparing a claim for the VA. When preparing a claim for service-connected disability compensation with the Department of Veterans Affairs, many types of claims require that you provide official records, specific VA forms, or sworn statements in order to substantiate the claim. This applies whether you're doing the claim yourself or your case is being handled by someone like me, a veteran service officer accredited by the VA. Service officers are provided by all of the major veteran service organizations. Some of them are Vietnam Veterans of America, the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign War, and Disabled American Veterans. Most states also have service officer programs, usually located in each county. I am mentioning the service organizations because you need to ensure that they are recovering the documents you need to support your claim, or that they explain to you how to do it yourself. Over the years I have been doing this work, I have handled cases previously handled by other service officers who failed to provide needed documentation, which resulted in claims being denied. Make sure that the forms you use are the most current version. All VA forms can be found on their website, va.gov, and most are fillable. Any forms other than the VA forms can be found on the web. The first form I want to discuss is Standard Form 180. You can find it on the web at the National Archives website and a number of other locations. This is the form you use to seek your military personnel and medical records. You use this for active duty, reserve, and National Guard records. Make sure you look at page 3. Based on when you were discharged, it will tell you where to send the form. It will either be the National Personnel Records Center, NPRC, in St. Louis, or your branch's Personnel Records Agency. These are the Army Human Resources Command, Headquarters Marine Corps, the Air Force Personnel Center, and the Navy Personnel Command. Coast Guard records are either at NPRC or the VA Records Management Center, also in St. Louis. Depending on when you were discharged, your military medical records will either be at NPRC or the VA Records Management Center. Older VA records, for instance from a claim you filed more than a few years ago, may also be stored here. All recent soldiers' medical records are supposed to go to the Records Management Center. If you're a widow or a dependent of a deceased veteran, you will also need to supply a copy of the veteran's death certificate. If the veteran is incompetent, then their fiduciary or guardian should have paperwork showing their appointment, which will also have to be included with the SF-180. For older veterans, I want to let you know not to be surprised if your records seem lacking. Over time, records not deemed essential are purged. In addition, make sure that in the other space on the SF-180, you specifically ask for orders. In a later podcast, I will talk about interpreting some of the documents you will get because they contain information you might otherwise miss and that could be important for your claim. If you were or are in the National Guard, use SF-180 to request those records from your state's Guard headquarters. If you're in the active reserves, use SF-180 to get those records directly from your unit. For the Guard, SF-180 is used if you're still an active Guard member or have been discharged. Remember, if you have more than one term of active duty in the reserves or the Guard, those records will be found either at NPRC, the Records Management Center, or your branch's personnel office. So make sure you enter the date of your enlistment and the date of discharge for each term of service. If you are retired military and you had 20 or more continuous years of service, you only need to enter the date of your first enlistment and the date of your final discharge. Now, the next form I want to talk about is VA Form 10-5345. This is a request for an authorization to release medical records or health information. This form is for requesting your VA medical records, records at your regional office, and vet center records. Vet center records require a separate release, because they are kept separate from your VA medical records, and even the VA cannot access them without your release. You send the release to the vet center, not the medical center or regional office. If you have been seen at more than one medical center, clinic, or vet center, or made claims in more than one regional office, make a separate request for each one, because you cannot count on a previous medical center or regional office to have sent your records to the locations where you currently receive treatment or have a claim pending. If a veteran is deceased or incompetent, the same rules I noted above for survivors and dependents apply. When you request records from a medical center, make sure you specifically request records from the medical center and the clinic where you receive primary care. In a typical request for medical records, see, quote, all records, end quote, in their possession. When you make a request for records at the regional office, you want to ask for all rating decisions, all compensation and pension exams, all statements on VA Form 21-4138, and any new or reopened claims. These will be on VA Forms 21-526 and 526B. If you were ever an inpatient at a military medical facility for more than 2 days, such as the Army Regional Medical Center in Landstuhl, Germany, Walter Reed, or the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, or any military hospital, those records are in an archives run by the National Archives in St. Louis. Use National Archives Form 13042 to request these records. Try to get your inpatient dates as accurate as possible. And speaking of the National Archives, they have a treasure trove of military records, particularly various types of unit records. They have a huge collection of records from Vietnam units, but also have records from World War II, Korea, and other conflicts from the global war on terror. These documents can often be the difference in a successful claim for combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder and losing that claim. Here's why. PTSD claims require exposure to combat trauma, and it can be presumed in some cases, but in others, you will have to be able to corroborate your combat trauma experiences. You will need to make a request to archives using the Freedom of Information Act, and you can find their contact information on their website. There are many places on the web where you can find a simple FOIA request that you can tailor to fit your needs. Try to keep the request as narrow as possible, because you may end up being told that they have hundreds or even thousands of pages of records for the period you ask about. This is important because archives will only provide the first 10 to 20 pages for free. You will have to pay for additional pages, and it can get quite pricey. I have had cases where my client could not narrow down the date, and we spent $300 to recover a month's worth of documents just to find the 3 or 4 pages we needed. Let's say you were in a transportation unit and drove convoys in Vietnam. Let's assume that your combat trauma involves being ambushed where trucks may have hit IEDs, been subjected to enemy fire, and people were killed and wounded. Unless you received a Purple Heart for being wounded in this attack, or a decoration for heroism, valor, or gallantry, your military personnel records are not going to have any information about this event. That's when you need to go looking for unit records. If you know the exact date of this attack, that's what you want to ask for in your FOIA request. Although when I have a case like this, I ask for the unit records for the day before and the day after. This is important because these documents may help explain what you were doing if, for instance, the convoy lasted more than a day, or show that people died from wounds the next day. If you don't remember the exact date, but you know the month, ask for the entire month. In the Army, the record of daily events is called the S3 Daily Staff Journal or Duty Officer's Log. All of the other branches keep similar records, although they may not be at archives, but are located in your branch's historical documents office. This document starts every day at 001 hours and ends at 2400 hours. If an event involves a battle, attack, or firefight, there could be several pages describing what happened and casualties. When I was doing research for my book, I filed a FOIA request for the S3 reports about the Battle of Fire Support Base Rifle when a unit of the 101st was overrun. Although this event occurred on February 11, 1970, I asked for the records for the day before and 2 days after. There were 9 pages, and they described every detail of what occurred, including the names of all of those killed in action and wounded in action. There are cases now, particularly for PTSD claims, will not have to do this. On July 12, 2010, the VA issued a fact sheet which laid out what are referred to as the relaxed standards for PTSD. The official title of the document is New Regulations on PTSD Claims, and you can find it on the web. It's now codified at 38 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 304D. This states, and this is a quote, satisfactory lay or other evidence that an injury or disease was incurred or aggravated in combat will be accepted as sufficient proof of service connection if the evidence is consistent with the circumstances, conditions, or hardships of such service, even though there is no official record of such occurrence or event. So, if you have a Purple Heart or a decoration for heroism, valor, or gallantry, the VA will presume you were exposed to combat trauma. This also applies if you have a Combat Infantryman's Badge, a Combat Medic's Badge, the Combat Action Badge, or the Navy Marine Corps Combat Action Ribbon. You can also show your combat exposure with sworn statements from others you served with, news articles that you might find in one of the Military Times' publications, or Stars and Stripes, and even information you can find on the web that shows that your unit was in a particular battle, such as the fights in Iraq and Sadr City. In fact, the unit you served with may well have a website or a Facebook page that will not only provide information, but also could put you in contact with others you served with. For statements from these kinds of places or people, always use VA Form 21-4138. They are signed under oath and the penalties of perjury. If you can meet the relaxed standards for PTSD claim, you can avoid having to use VA Form 21-0781. This is a statement in support of claim for service connection for post-traumatic stress disorder. If you need to use this form, it may well be that you will need to procure unit records or statements from buddies in order to fill it out properly. This form requires you to describe 2 traumatic events. You will need to describe the date the event occurred, the location of the event, the unit you were assigned to, and the dates you were in this unit. In the description of incident block, be as detailed as you can. If you receive the decoration, that goes in, along with the names of those who were killed in action or wounded in action. And you can find people who were killed if you know the date or the approximate date. You can locate the names of those who were killed in action on something that you can find on the internet called the COFELT database. You can download it and set it up in an Excel format. It's sortable. It's really easy to use. In the recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, there are detailed casualty lists that you can find on the web. You can also send a FOIA request to the unit you were with and ask for this information. There is also another way you can use this form and only have to describe one, and I put this in quotes, event. The VA recognizes that some military occupational specialties, even in peacetime, are, by themselves, sufficient to cause PTSD in some soldiers. Some of those MOSers include explosive ordnance disposal, graves registration, or corpsmen who serve in battlefield, hospital, or medical units and who did not receive a combat medic's badge. These are jobs where the soldier is constantly exposed to traumatic events, and the VA recognizes this in most cases. It is still important, however, to provide as much detail as you can about exactly what you were doing, when and where it happened, and how it has impacted on your life after combat. Private medical records are another source of evidence that can often make the claim virtually irrefutable. Many of my Vietnam clients with diseases that are presumed to have been caused by exposure to herbicides were initially diagnosed outside of the VA system. This is particularly prevalent with prostate cancer and type 2 diabetes, as well as the secondary problems caused by these illnesses. These can include neuropathies in the extremities caused by diabetes or incontinence and erectile dysfunction in prostate cancer cases, particularly after surgery or radiation and chemotherapy treatment. This has not been meant to be an all-inclusive chat about getting records, but I have given you the basic information for the most important forms you need, locations where records can be found, and how to get them. If you have specific questions, you can send me an email request on the National Veterans Rights Association website, which is nationalveteransrights.org. Thanks, and I'll talk to you again soon.
You've been listening to Putting Veterans First, a program designed to help millions of vets and their families receive the benefits and care they deserve. Putting Veterans First is a presentation of the NVRA, the National Veterans Rights Association.